A master manipulator leaves a trail of lies.
He's not a doctor, he's not a scientist. He was never really a husband. What he was he was a hell of a con man.
He wanted not only to give me youth, but he wanted me as his mate.
But his games turn deadly when he infiltrates an unlikely group of believers.
We found a lot of videotapes pertaining to UFO cover-up conspiracies.
And creates a bizarre and frightening scheme.
She knew she was going to be hunted like the dog she was. And yes, she knew, like a scared rabbit in an open field, she knew.
I believe that there is an incredibly strong alien presence on this planet. I also believe they've been here long before humans were here. And I believe that they have an agenda of eradicating the human presence on this planet.
Along a deserted stretch of road 100 miles south of Albuquerque, a highway worker finds some bloody clothing wrapped in a tarp. The items appear to belong to an adolescent girl or a very small woman. With them, an ominous loop of duct tape.
One piece of duct tape appears as a figure 8, which is the pattern that you'll get when you put it around someone's wrists. There's another piece of wadded up duct tape that has long strands of black hair in it.
The local police get a match that night when a missing persons report comes in. A petite Albuquerque woman of Asian descent has been missing for 24 hours. The items are sent to Albuquerque detective Mike Fox.
The panties looked like they belonged to a 12 or 13-year-old girl. It gave me the first sense of how small Gurley was.
Gurley Chu Hasenkopf, a teller at an Albuquerque bank, had been reported missing by her co-workers. Detective Fox had just opened the missing persons investigation when the clothing and duct tape turned up. Fox immediately suspects foul play and heads to Gurley's apartment to look for evidence. Inside, he finds 3 damp stains on the carpet, and the room smells of bleach.
It was automatically believed that it could have been some sort of cleanup after an attack or something to that effect.
A luminol test is performed, and the stains light up, confirming the presence of blood.
There wasn't any doubt at that point something violent had happened in her apartment.
Investigators also find small drops of blood on the couch. They cut the fabric to take to the Albuquerque crime lab. They're even more thorough with the blood-stained carpet.
They elected to take not just a cutout patch of carpet where those bleach stains were from Gurley's apartment, they took out the entire carpet.
The carpet was an extremely great piece of evidence to take back. It made the difference in this case.
Police launch a massive search for the missing woman. But who exactly is Gurley Hasenkopf? Fox learns that Gurley is 35 years old, a native of Malaysia. She's recently separated from her husband, Dyson Hasenkopf, whom she'd met 9 years earlier on vacation in the U.S. Detectives do a background check on Gurley's estranged husband, and their suspicion is raised. To begin with, no one really knows what Hasenkopf does for a living.
He claimed that he was a doctor, a heart surgeon, a DNA scientist. He claimed to work in a lab where he created human beings with petri dishes.
His interest in cutting-edge science borders on the bizarre.
Dyson had very strong beliefs in aliens. In fact, he admitted to me that he was part alien.
Dyson had studied science in college, but failed to get into medical school. He soon found another way to make a living.
Dyson Hasenkopf found real work to be distasteful, and he moved on to cons.
Within 30 seconds of meeting you, he could size you up. If he saw no opportunity to exploit your flesh for his gain, he moved on. If he saw a potential victim, he moved in.
Posing as a doctor and geneticist, Dyson duped scores of victims into fake medical treatments in exchange for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
He manipulated people into making investments into his science projects. He was going to invent this and invent that. He was going to solve the Human Genome Project before the human genome had actually ever been solved.
It turns out Gurley was just another victim of his cons.
What Hasenkopf saw was, here's an Asian woman who will be submissive, who will cook me meals and bear my children and keep a clean house.
Shortly before they separated, Gurley caught on to Dyson's con game. She also came to realize that her marriage was a sham.
By this point in time, Gurley is becoming well aware that her husband is carrying on with a variety of women on the internet. And ultimately she learned that there were local women too.
Police records show that when Gurley confronted Dyson, he went into a rage. He started threatening her with violence.
The threats against Gurley were his way of protecting his interest of being a con man and making sure that he was not exposed for the world to see.
Then, late one night, she found him loosening the tires on her car. Terrified, she ran to a neighbor's house for safety. She never went back to Dyson.
She was in her nightgown and barefoot, and she came running to here and rang the bell, and we opened the door, and she said, "He wants to kill me."
But Gurley was still scared. Detectives learned that she enrolled in karate classes to protect herself.
She was very much afraid of her husband, and in fact stated that they were estranged, she was in hiding, and if he found her, he would kill her.
Gurley filed for divorce, further infuriating Hasenkopf.
He had damaged her car and done things to her clothes and had made threats even to dispose of her body where no one would ever find it, and in such a way that she would just simply dissolve.
Gurley was so afraid of Dyson, she went into hiding, moving to an apartment with a security system and a secluded entrance. But her plan may have backfired.
Putting herself over here to keep her away from Dyson and being easily seen, she made it so that when they came to abduct her, she could easily be taken out the door, down this short walk, and you could just easily take her body, throw it in the trunk, and drive out of the parking lot.
Detective Fox has a lot of tough questions for Dyson Hasenkopf. But when he goes to Hasenkopf's house, it's empty. The prime suspect has skipped town. According to neighbors, he moved out the day before Gurley disappeared.
We quickly started running into a lack of information of where Dyson was. It looked like he had left town in a white Isuzu, and so we put a locate nationally for him.
With the suspect and the victim missing, investigators are racing to unravel one of New Mexico's most twisted mysteries.
Who owns this planet? Well, I'm going to tell you that humanity does not. These creatures have been here way before mankind was ever thought of. Who owns this planet? Well, you're going to find out real soon.
Bloody clothes belonging to Albuquerque bank teller Gurley Hasenkopf are found along a remote New Mexico highway. Detective Michael Fox suspects Gurley's estranged husband, Dyson Hasenkopf, is responsible.
This is a case that was showing was planned, and it was a planned execution of a very nice woman who didn't deserve this by any means. She was a devoted friend. She was a caring person to her family. She would send money back to her family in Malaysia. She had done nothing in her life except marry a despicable human being. So it was a matter of trying to bring some justice to her death.
But now, 2 days since Gurley's clothes turned up, the prime suspect has also vanished. Desperate for a lead, Fox questions Linda Henning, an acquaintance of Dyson's from his UFO Believers group.
Linda Henning looks like a normal, average person that couldn't hurt anybody. And when I first met her, I thought, she probably wouldn't have much to do with the case.
Fox gets immediately suspicious when Henning gives an alibi for Hasenkopf, claiming he was at her house almost the entire night in question.
She gave only an hour time span that she was away from Dyson, the night that Gurley disappeared.
She consents to give investigators samples of her hair and blood. She also agrees to a formal videotaped interrogation. When questioned about the last time she saw Hasenkopf, she can't seem to answer.
I'm trying to lead up to when the last time you saw him is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
When
think
you finally
of
said goodbye, I'm leaving, I'm heading out.
Yeah, I just,
She claims she has never met Gurley, and she and Dyson barely know each other.
He said he'd call you, get settled. Was it right he wanted to keep a friend?
She couldn't even pronounce his name. She said she called him D or Doc. She wouldn't even call him a friend in the interview.
But Linda's lying. When Fox later talks to her coworkers, he discovers that Henning and Hasenkopf are much more than casual acquaintances.
As time goes on, we start interviewing Linda's coworkers. She's telling people they're getting married. So right away, the stories just aren't matching.
Linda doesn't act like your typical witness. Linda makes a big-time habit of avoiding police after this initial interview. And she's not staying at her townhouse anymore. She's driving other people's vehicles. She's staying at different hotel rooms. Police are doing 24/7 surveillance on her. They got teams of cops watching her every move.
Investigators get a search warrant for her house. And then things get even weirder.
We found a lot of videotapes pertaining to UFO cover-up conspiracies and government conspiracies.
In fact, Henning has done extensive research on extraterrestrial life. She even does her own illustrations of aliens.
She believes that there are aliens who are running this world, that our leaders are reptilians, that the Masons in particular are reptilians.
This is the symbol for the reptilian species, their empire. This symbol, with a little dot in it, this is the symbol of their queen.
But Fox's focus is not on science fiction, it's on facts. He needs some hard evidence to find out what happened to Gurley and where she is. Linda's car provides some clues.
One of the things that stuck out in my mind and other detectives on the scene was that her car had just been washed. And later on, in doing a search warrant of the car, we found a receipt for having her tires balanced.
The roads near where Gurley's clothes were found are notoriously rough. Investigators are starting to believe that Linda was an accomplice in a plot hatched by her lover.
Diaz and Hasenkopf did not act alone. Not only would he not have been able to gain entry by himself into Gurley's apartment, she wouldn't have let him in, but if he even was able to do that, he was small in stature, and his attempt to carry a body out the front door of Gurley's house would have been very noticeable.
Investigators are still trying to find out what exactly happened inside Gurley's apartment. They turn to the crime lab for help.
Certainly, the amount of blood was consistent with someone still being alive when they left the apartment. There was no other signs that Gurley Hasenkopf was killed in the apartment, no bullet holes in the walls, that type of thing.
Forensic experts revisit the blood-stained carpet and find some surprising evidence that was initially overlooked.
We see some very small, what appear to be blood stains on it.
They swab the stains to test for blood. And they get a positive result. Further DNA tests reveal the blood droplets didn't come from Gurley, It's the blood of Linda Henning.
It comes back that the DNA was Linda Henning's, and I mean, yeah, there's jaw-dropping going on because people are thinking Dizon Hasenkopf's.
That was a really big break in the case because Linda had said that she did not know Gurley. She did not know where Gurley lived and wouldn't even recognize her if she saw her.
Investigators can now place Linda Henning in Gurley's apartment, but they can't explain how she would have gained entry.
We searched back a year or so into Linda Henning's banking patterns and her banking transactions, and suddenly, about a month before the murder, they changed. And they changed because she started going to Gurley Hasenkopf's branch.
Bank records prove Gurley and Henning had prior contact, making it feasible that Gurley would open the door for her. After 3 weeks with no sign of Gurley, the case is now officially a homicide investigation. Prosecutors convene a grand jury, and Henning is indicted for murder. But the prime suspect is still on the loose.
Detective Fox.
Then, a promising tip comes in on Dizon Hasenkopf's whereabouts. A neighbor has gotten threatening phone calls from him.
She immediately after one of those threats called the investigator and said, he just called me. He said, hang up, press star 69. Well, guess what? They got South Carolina. I believe it came back precisely to Hanahan, South Carolina. So they knew where to go looking for him. And it was the FBI in part who moved in and arrested Dizon Hasenkopf.
Hasenkopf is found living with yet another woman he wooed on the internet. He is in possession of firearms and objects that tie him directly to the crime. Searching his belongings, police hit pay dirt.
He had personal items of Gurley Hasenkopf's that he should not have had, that Gurley Hasenkopf had had in the weeks prior to her murder. It included an address book that he had taken from her. It included some jewelry that he had taken from her.
In the house, they also find a steam cleaner with traces of blood in it.
Unfortunately, the blood was chemically inhibited, so we could not determine whose blood it was. But the fact that there was human blood inside of a steam cleaner certainly linked Dizon Hasenkopf to the crime.
Hasenkopf is brought back to Albuquerque and charged with making interstate threats.
When we took him from federal custody and put him into county jail, I transported him. His main area of focus was that we didn't have a body, and without a body, there's no crime.
Hasenkopf is right. Without a body, police don't yet have enough evidence to charge him with murder. Unless they find another clue, and fast, the prime suspect could slip away for good. 6 weeks after Gurley Hasenkopf disappears, her husband Dizon Hasenkopf is in custody. But detectives still have no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, and police still haven't found her body.
That body would tell a story. I mean, if her fingernails are still there, if this body hasn't been so compromised, what might be beneath those fingernails?
But finding Gurley's body may be impossible. The area where her bloody clothes were found is a vast stretch of desert, littered with old mines. A body could easily be lost here forever.
There are countless mines. They have attempted to map all these historic mines, but you can't account for every single one of them because they appear that frequently on this landscape. There are mines where I've dropped a rock and you wait to hear something, and sometimes you never do. They're deep.
Investigators are sure Dizon Hasenkopf is the key to solving this case. But if anyone knows how to slither his way out of trouble, it's him.
One thing that was really interesting about Dizon was that we found out that he got hooked up with a con man, and he was able to con money out of this con man. He was this good.
Even his name is made up. He was born Armando Chavez, but then took on a new identity.
Dizon Hasenkopf thought that the Japanese people and the German people represented the master races. And his name apparently is an amalgam of a Japanese and German name.
The case against Dizon is bolstered when police get a call from one of his many girlfriends. She tells investigators that Dizon was furious about his $60,000 divorce settlement with Gurley.
He told me that she'd never lived to see a dime of that money. I said, what do you mean by that? And he says, just what I said. I have hired a person that is going to go and take her the day that she signs those papers. And I says, but missing people come up all the time. What do you mean by that? And he said, not if they're dissected.
Julie McGuire is just one of the dozens of women Hasenkopf duped.
He's very smart. He learns your vulnerability. He knows which button to press to get you to do what he wants you to do.
He convinced Julie that he was a geneticist with a formula for eternal youth.
He said that he could inject me with a drug that would stop the cell growth. He explained that it had radiation in it, and the reason behind that was because aliens needed me to travel to a different planet, basically. And that was the ultimate, because I would live forever.
She paid him thousands of dollars for anti-aging treatments.
He wanted not only to give me youth, but he wanted me as his mate. He was very flattering, so he could make you believe anything he wanted to.
He was promising many women that he would make them younger, and if they had an ailment, even something as serious as cancer, he would make it disappear. And what they were actually getting was likely vitamin B12. And of course what he was getting was their money, and usually some sex along the way.
There's a woman dying of cancer that he had bilked for over $300,000 and bought his house through this.
Now, detectives have premeditation and motive, but they still need proof. Fox goes back to the crime lab one more time. Trace evidence experts have been taping Gurley's carpet, gathering tiny particles like hairs and fibers, examining and tagging each and every piece under a microscope.
The first piece of evidence that was of importance was for the gray hairs and the shorter dark human hairs, which I removed from the tapings and handed over to one of our DNA analysts.
Of the hundreds of hairs plucked from the carpet, there's a single strand that could tie the whole case together. DNA tests confirm the hair came from Dyson Hasenkopf. A single hair has placed him at the crime scene.
We knew that Gurley Hasenkopf would never voluntarily let Diazin Hasenkopf into her apartment. So any DNA evidence that linked Diazin Hasenkopf to that apartment was powerful evidence, powerful incriminating evidence against Diazin Hasenkopf.
The carpet yields even more microscopic clues.
I noticed other items such as animal hairs and things like sand and glitter. So I had posed questions to the detectives and the district attorney. Were there other individuals involved that might have these items in their possession?
Fox gets a tip implicating another member of the UFO club, Bill Miller. Miller is an outdoorsman and survivalist with the combat skills that Dyson lacks.
Dyson is a cowardly type that wouldn't want to be directly involved with the dirty work. And Bill Miller really fit the profile at that time.
Once you get into that UFO group, you learn from everybody that Miller, Hasenkopf, and Henning were a trio. These three not only attended the UFO meetings together, they went off and did other things together too.
Fox looks for evidence to back up his theory that Bill Miller is involved. Again, the carpet tells the story.
We have this small amount of blood next to a small amount of blood of Gurley's and Linda's, indicating a probably pretty even fight. And then all of a sudden we have these three large areas of blood that were chemically inhibited with bleach. It just fit Bill Miller coming in, seeing Gurley beating Linda up, and just knocked her to the ground.
But Fox is struggling with motive. Why would Miller and Henning agree to kill Gurley?
Dyson Hasenkopf had only known Bill Miller and Linda Henning for approximately 6 weeks prior to Gurley's murder. And how somebody could just meet somebody and then be willing to kill for them is a huge stretch.
But after looking through Henning's sketches and writings, Fox discovers how intense her paranoia is about a reptilian alien occupation. It is that paranoia, Fox believes, that Hassenkopf preyed upon.
He created this scenario that he was a 7,000-year-old space alien that was here on Earth, and that there were reptilian aliens that were taking over in human form. He basically was trying to help save Earth. And we think that Gurley became this alien queen that Linda had to kill so that Earth was protected.
This is Linda Henning's own drawing of a warrior woman ready for battle. It was included in a confiscated letter she wrote to Hassenkopf.
Diaz and Hassenkopf found in Linda Henning the absolute perfect mark. She was willing to believe everything he said. She was willing to do anything for him.
The theory is backed up when investigators find a ninja sword hidden in the ceiling of Henning's garage. It had been purchased the day Gurley disappeared by Dyson Hassenkopf.
A samurai sword is the sword of a warrior. A ninja is an assassin. And to people like the prosecution in this case, that's a very important distinction.
On the blade of the sword was human blood that had been cleaned. It was cleaned to the extent that there was not enough DNA left on the sword to determine whose blood it was.
Fox re-examines the tarp found with Gurley's clothing. On it, he finds a wipe pattern consistent with a knife or sword. His speculation about the murder weapon seems to be bearing out. But is there enough forensic evidence to convict Hassenkopf and Henning when the victim is still missing? For 6 months, Detective Michael Fox has been investigating the murder of Gurley Hassenkopf. He has 2 main suspects in custody, Dyson Hassenkopf and his lover, Linda Henning. He thinks their fascination with aliens played a role in the murder. The body of Gurley Hassenkopf is still missing, but forensic evidence is starting to tie the murder case together.
One of the hairs that was off of the bloody tarp matched the mitochondrial DNA from Linda Henning. So that not only put Linda in the apartment, but Linda had to have something to do with that tarp at some point.
There is also more trace evidence from Gurley's carpet.
They looked like crystals that had been dyed a number of different colors that I saw, blue, green, and red.
The particles are identified as art sand. Investigators conduct a new search of Linda Henning's garage. They list art sand on the search warrant, and they find it in droves.
When we were in the garage, we did find the old-fashioned plastic milk crates full of like gallon jugs of these different colored sands and different plastic jugs of glitter, funnels and little bottles to make the art sand.
But art sand is not the only strange thing experts find in the carpet. There are also unusual animal hairs.
I discovered dyed deer hair that had been dyed pink or blue or some other colors.
There's, I think, over 100 fragments of natural and pink dyed deer hair on Gurley's carpet, on the tarp, on her clothing.
And I started questioning the investigators, is there someone who uses dyed animal hair for some reason?
Luckily, we had some people in the department that knew that this was for tying flies for fishing. And now we're starting to have evidence come forward that points to Bill Miller.
Investigators know that Miller is a fisherman. They search his house and find dyed deer hair that matches their samples. The evidence against Linda Henning and Bill Miller is mounting. But so far, the only forensic evidence against Hassenkopf is a single hair. Then, the bloody clothes and tarp are re-examined, this time for blood from anyone other than Gurley.
There was one stain on one of the shoulders of the blouse that was real tiny, tiny little dots, where most of the blood was, big splotches. But on the shoulder, there was a stain that was just tiny little dots. And so that was one of the ones that I looked at more closely.
That stain on the shoulder is a pivotal piece of evidence. It's a mixture of blood and saliva. The DNA matches Dyson Hassenkopf. Hasenkopf wasn't just in Gurley's apartment. He was present at her murder.
There's no question that when the DNA evidence came back that linked Diaz and Hasenkopf to the crime, it was a big moment.
DNA is as good as a fingerprint. It's very good evidence.
The prosecution has been building a murder case against Hasenkopf for months when he surprises everyone and pleads guilty.
During this case, we executed somebody on death row. And I think it became very meaningful to Dyson Hasenkopf that that could be his end. And I think that he was a coward and cut a plea deal.
Is that correct that Mr. Hasenkopf, you want to plead guilty to these 13 felony counts?
Yes.
Hasenkopf takes full credit for the crime, absolving Linda of any involvement. He claims he planned the murder and Bill Miller executed it.
He says, in Bill Miller, I had a guy who was into the militia, who talked about black bag operations, and who had, quote, always wanted to hunt a human being and gut it like a fish. Hasenkopf said, I really didn't even have to pay him any money. He just wanted the opportunity.
As part of his plea, Hasenkopf agrees to tell everything he knows. But when questioned, he denies any knowledge of Gurley's whereabouts.
This is my statement. I have no knowledge, to my knowledge, of where the body of Gurley Hasenkopf is.
He says that Bill Miller was in charge of that sequence that involved the kidnapping and the murder and getting rid of the body. Hasenkopf's duty, he maintains, was strictly to go in afterwards and clean up any forensic evidence. So yeah, he says, basically he gets the last laugh in a way.
For prosecutors, the mystery takes a perverse twist when Linda Henning's cellmate comes forward with disturbing new information.
The cellmate asked Henning straight out, what did you guys do with Gurley Hasenkopf? Henning's response was nonverbal. She indicated with her hands that they had eaten Gurley Hasenkopf.
Hasenkopf is sent to prison for life. But the case isn't over. Fox still has 2 accomplices he needs to convict. But can he prove they did it? When Dyson Hasenkopf accepts a plea deal and goes to prison for life, Detective Mike Fox can close one chapter in the Gurley Hasenkopf investigation. But Linda Henning still denies any role in Gurley's murder.
I'm innocent. I've never done anything to cause the death of a 2-legged or a 4-legged creature. It has always been my belief from day one that the blood was planted. I wasn't there.
Linda Henning's case goes to trial in October 2002. The DA's office decides that the circumstances of Gurley's death are so horrific, they want the death penalty.
She wasn't merely killed, she was hunted by Linda Henning and Diaz and Hasenkopf. And because of that, we believe that the death penalty was appropriate.
This could have been the first woman executed in New Mexico in the modern era since the 1800s. And yet there was no body.
But prosecutors have a challenge. Linda Henning is an unusually attractive and intelligent defendant with no criminal record.
I didn't have any trouble in my life before. And from the moment I met him, it seemed like I had FBI in my soup coming out my ears.
The prosecution argues that Henning agreed to kill Gurley because she believed that Gurley wasn't a human. One of Henning's best friends testifies that shortly after Gurley disappeared, Henning talked about battling with aliens.
Did the defendant make statements to you about being a queen?
She said that she had been appointed a queen of the world and that her responsibilities was to save the world from other queens coming from other planets.
And did she say with what she would be fighting these other queens?
With a sword.
Dyson, it seemed, had set her up, but Henning admits nothing.
Dyson does not control me or dominate me, and nobody does. Whoever can control an opinionated woman, a strong-willed woman, an independent woman?
But she's clearly captivated by him.
He's brilliant, he's charming. Dyson is a maniac. I mean, he's a maniac.
The trial lasts for several weeks. The star witness for the defense is none other than Dyson Hasenkopf.
The big wow is when Hasenkopf comes into the courtroom finally. Before he's even to the front of the courtroom to sit down, his eyes are locked in on the prosecution and Detective Fox, who's also sitting next to the prosecutors. He's got a kind of a dancing smile on his face. He's ready to engage in a battle of wits, a battle of minds. That entire courtroom, as he started off, was on its edge of its collective seats, if you will. His eyebrows danced, he had these long fingernails, and that voice.
She knew she was going to be hunted like the dog she was. And yes, she knew, like a scared rabbit in an open field, she knew.
He explains his motives in chilling detail.
Hopefully, for my end of it, that she suffered the most excruciating pain known to mankind was what I was hoping for. I don't know that to be fact.
He maintains that only he and Miller were at the scene. He says he planted Henning's blood.
Did you put Linda Henning's blood in Gurley Hasenkopf's house?
Yes.
Did you put other trace evidence, whether accidentally or intentionally, into that house?
Yes.
Everything he said seemed to be aimed at excluding Linda Henning from any role in any murder plot or kidnapping plot. He set her up entirely as an innocent bystander who was meant to play a role as an alibi.
When challenged about his efforts to cover Linda, Hasenkopf once again shocks the courtroom.
I don't care whether or not you kill this woman. You want to put the needle in her arm, go ahead. The only thing that's going to happen here is that you're going to kill my next victim.
But that doesn't wash with prosecutors. They have love letters written between Henning and Hasenkopf in prison that prove his testimony is just another performance.
In a way, he's nothing more than a comic character, a dark one at that.
To this day, I have no remorse, no pity, no sorrow. It's done, complete, it's finished.
I've always thought of Hasenkopf as a guy who's kind of like a puppeteer. I see a guy who's got all these strings coming out of his hand and different lives at the bottom of each string. And it's kind of like a nightmarish version of the Wizard of Oz. When you get right down to it, you can expose this guy behind the curtain. He's not a doctor, he's not a scientist. He was never really a husband. What he was he was a hell of a con man.
Will the jury believe that Linda Henning is an innocent woman set up by Hasenkopf? Or will they decide she was a willing partner in his murder plot?
In every past life I've been murdered, so what am I up for now? The death penalty.
October 2002, 3 years since Gurley Hasenkopf is reported missing and presumed dead. After 5 tense days of deliberations, the jury has a verdict.
Please rise, court is in session.
Thank you. You can bring the jury in. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you can be seated. We find the defendant, Linda Henning, guilty of first-degree murder, felony murder, as charged in the alternative to count 1. We find the defendant, Linda Henning, guilty of kidnapping, as charged in count 3.
Linda Henning is convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. But she's spared the death penalty, sentenced to life in prison instead.
I wasn't surprised. If they would have said, well, burn her at the stake, I would have said, well, it wouldn't be the first time. You know, a past life, I believe I was burned at the stake, so.
Through it all, she remains devoted to the man responsible for her downfall.
I love him, and I probably always will. There's a part of him that is wonderful. It's not this monster that everyone sees. I mean, there's a part that's really wonderful. You just gotta get to that part, and it's not so easy. But I resent the fact that he's just turned my life topsy-turvy.
Linda's sentence concludes the most extensive forensic case in New Mexico's history.
In some ways, this case was a very typical murder trial because the motives for Dyson Hasenkopf were greed and Unfortunately, that's a motive we see far too often. In other ways, this was a murder case like none other. To us, however, what this case boiled down to, it was a case of forensics. It was a case about forensic evidence, about DNA, not necessarily titillating facts.
For Mike Fox, the conviction is a personal victory.
We had given Gurley some sense of justice. That was really the key to this.
But for Gurley's family, who are Buddhist, the anguish is far from over.
They believe that her body is left to wander in the darkness until she can be found and taken home. They want to have her cremated, and they have a place in a temple where her remains, in their mind, belong. So she's still left out there wandering.
The failure to find Gurley's body remains a disappointment for Mike Fox. So does the grand jury's decision not to bring charges against Bill Miller.
Definitely, Bill Miller is a frustration. I think the evidence points to him being involved in this case. A grand jury disagreed with me. And I did, in my mind and in my heart, the best job I could on this case. And there's a point where you have to let it go and trust it to other people. And they came in and I think responsibly looked at the case. They just disagreed with me.
Despite 2 convictions, there are lingering questions about the case. What exactly happened to Gurley on that fateful night remains shrouded in mystery.
One day I just hope that somebody involved in this case will gain a conscience and even indirectly, anonymously lead us to her body. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I think that's the only chance we're going to have of finding her.
We really don't know what happened. We don't know who administered the fatal shot or blow or whatever might have been done to kill Gurley Chu Hasenkopf. And really, more importantly, we don't know where she's at.